Tonight you'll hear some of the craziest ancient cover-ups ever revealed by Graham Hancock. Forgotten discoveries, sealed chambers, and moments when history itself seemed to hide what it couldn't explain. It all begins inside the Great Pyramid of Giza, where an engineer named Rudolf Gantenbrink discovered a narrow shaft blocked by a mysterious stone door that was never meant to be found. What lies behind it, and why it was kept secret, became one of the most unsettling stories Hancock ever told. This is where the first cover-up begins.
We're looking here at a very careful attempt to hide away time capsules, and I repeat, this is in plural, two places, not just one place at Giza. And for me, this is part of the significance that we don't only have a chamber underneath the Great Sphinx, but we also have a chamber inside the Great Pyramid, the doorway to which was discovered by a robot camera in 1993. The Great Pyramid of Egypt, which weighs 6 million tons, has within its massive superstructure four very unusual features which are not found in any other pyramid. And these are narrow shafts which angle up steeply through the monument from inside two of the known chambers of the monument. And two of these shafts, they're just 8 inches wide and 8 inches high. You could roughly fit a small dog into the mouth of one of these shafts. Two of these shafts go all the way through the body of the pyramid and exit on the outside and actually point at particularly significant stars. And the other two shafts from the lower chamber do not exit on the outside of the monument, and it was these, both the northern and the southern shaft, that were explored by the German engineer Rudolf Gantenbrink in 1993 with a very high-tech robot camera. And in the northern shaft, after a journey of approximately 80 feet, the robot came to a bend in the shaft. There were some metal objects observed on the floor which the camera could not capture in high definition, but they felt that they did not want to negotiate it around the bend unless it became stuck in the shaft. So they pulled it down. They then explored the southern shaft, and they reached the end of the southern shaft after a journey of 200 feet. And what was at the end of that shaft was a door, a portcullis door, complete with two metal handles. And this was the point at which Rudolf Gantenbrink's project inside the Great Pyramid was cancelled forthwith by the Egyptian authorities, and has never since been resumed, although in a rather parallel case to what is happening at the Sphinx, and again involving this same Egyptian official, Zahi Hawass. An announcement has been made that a Canadian team will be involved in opening that door later this year, and again there are signs of some sort of ghastly commercial enterprise surrounding this project as well. Now, if you were the survivors, let's just look at this theoretically. If you were the survivors of a lost civilization, of a civilization that was destroyed in the enormous cataclysm that brought the last ice age to an end, and a great civilization, I believe, and one with a high spiritual knowledge and purpose, if you had survived, if you were amongst the few survivors, and you had precious knowledge that you wished to pass down to the future, and you would be far-sighted enough to know that mankind would revert to barbarism, and that there would be a time of terrible darkness, perhaps for thousands of years, before humanity again reached a level where it could use this information, you would hide it away very, very, very carefully, but you would provide clues that would enable people eventually to find it. And I think that that's what we're looking at on the Giza Plateau in Egypt. We're looking at the clues that lead to specific locations. That shaft which led to that doorway was always a clue. The opening of that shaft was sealed until 1872. The last 5 inches of stone over the mouth of that shaft had been left deliberately in place, and if you walked into that to the lower chamber in the Great Pyramid before 1872, you would just have seen blank walls. But a very enterprising engineer went around those walls one day, tapping with a hammer, and found two hollow-sounding points, and he chopped those through with a chisel, and lo and behold, there were the mouths of these two shafts ascending up at steep angles into the body of the pyramid. And it's in these shafts, as I say, that these discoveries were made in 1993. And I think the builders of that monument always intended them to be found, but did not intend them to be found by barbarians who would not know what to do with the knowledge hidden there.
Well, I'm not sure what that says about our present state of social affairs, but Graham, you mentioned hints. Are there any hints about when these things should be found? I mean, is there any text, anything that tells us the timeline when these things should be found?
There is a curious suggestion of this, which is locked deeply into the entire ancient Egyptian system of knowledge, and this is connected to the changing patterns of the stars and the great cycle of the constellation of Orion, which, like all the stars in the sky, changes its positions over a 26,000-year cycle. And the effect of this change in position is to cause its altitude above the horizon to continuously rise for 13,000 years, then to fall for 13,000 years, then to rise again for 13,000 years. And if we go back to the beginning of that cycle, we find ourselves in the period when these monuments, when this incredible site was originally conceived, which I'm absolutely adamantly certain is the epoch of 10,500 BC, and it is now a simple astronomical fact that we're at the end of the current cycle. We're at the highest altitude, whereas at that time the stars were at the lowest altitude. We were then at the first time of Orion Osiris, and we are now at the last time, what would be in astronomical terms literally the last of days. And there is a strong indication in that material that this is the time we live in now. Of course, you're speaking in terms of vast expanses of thousands of years, and you would have to say, give or take 100 or 200 years, but it is our time. This appears to be the time that this was intended to happen. And when I look around the world and see the state and the mess that we are in, it frankly seems to me that this is indeed the time when we desperately need a vision from the past, something that will shake us up and help us to understand that we absolutely must find a new direction in life as a species if we are not to completely blow it, completely waste and destroy the opportunity we've been given. And that's why I'm so concerned about the projects that are taking place at Giza. I'm concerned with the secrecy surrounding these projects, and I'm concerned that objects could actually be removed from those chambers, and it could be taken away without the rest of us knowing anything about it whatsoever.
Or now, I don't know a lot about the pyramids, but I remember all the old movies, Graham, about the pyramids and sand shifting and walls and rocks coming down. Is it not possible that if they go blundering in the wrong way, Graham, there could be destruction?
Yes, it's highly possible. I would say it's highly possible. I would say that the ancient geniuses who created these structures had a profound knowledge of human nature and knew that greed and ego and the lust for power would come into play when these chambers were being discovered. And it is most probable indeed that they will have taken safeguards to protect against that, which still doesn't mean that the rest of us should be complacent about it. Perhaps the safeguard that they created was a psychological one. Perhaps the safeguard is us. Perhaps it's up to us. Perhaps it's up to the world community to assert definitely that these monuments are a legacy of the whole of mankind, and that the research and the projects that are taking place at them cannot be monopolized in secret by a few wealthy and powerful individuals. Perhaps that's the safeguard. Perhaps it's awakening human knowledge which will protect these chambers ultimately.
And while digging through old recordings, I found something I'd never heard before, a hidden audio of Graham Hancock talking about a lost city beneath the ocean. The place is called Dwarka, India's sunken city of the gods.
What can you tell us about what's been found off the coast of India?
Well, what's been found off the coast of India, you have two separate sites. You have sites in the northwest of India, and you have sites as about as far away from those as you can get and still be in India, in the southeast of India. And I've been following both of these areas as a diver and as a researcher for several years now. So one of India's government agencies, the National Institute of Ocean Technology, which specializes in high-tech instrumentation for remote surveys on the seabed, was conducting a survey in a place called the Gulf of Cambay in northwest India. Now, they were not doing archaeology. They were there actually testing the pollution levels in the Gulf of Cambay. Mm-hmm. And they were using an instrument called side-scan sonar, which sends out a beam down to the seabed and which bounces back an image what's on the seabed. What I feel is that the basic proposition that I put forward, which is that there was a higher level of civilization, perhaps much higher than we've expected way back in the Ice Age, and that an urban city-dwelling culture, a culture that had reached that level, was destroyed by the rising sea levels at the end of the Ice Age, and that we're going to find the remains of it underwater. That seems to be being supported by evidence at the moment, but we need to do a whole lot more work on these places, and there's a lot of bridges to cross yet, but it's looking good. So back in May last year, they were doing this survey, and they started to notice very regular geometrical formations on the seabed. They had geologists with them, and they just couldn't understand what these things were. They were about 120 feet down, and they were very extensive, and they focused their survey in that area, followed this up, and they found that what they seemed to be sitting on top of were two cities, roughly 5 miles long and about a mile wide, laid out alongside of ancient riverbeds, parallel to each other but about 15 miles apart. And to give a sense of the size of these cities, if you added them both together, you would have a city the size of Manhattan.
My God.
Now, this is very extraordinary, and it was a very extraordinary discovery at the time because the depth of submergence suggests that these are very old. But when the National Institute of Ocean Technology went public with its findings in May last year, nobody took them seriously because the suggestion that there could have been fantastic cities of this scale thousands and thousands of years ago, which had been covered up by water, was just too difficult for archaeologists to swallow, and they suffered a lot of ridicule at that time. But they didn't give up, and they went back with their research vessel, and they pulled up using, in fact, a mechanical grab. They put themselves over the top of the cities, and they pulled up from the seabed more than 2,000 man-made artifacts, including pottery, jewelry, even human remains, teeth, bones, a vertebrae, a jawbone, wonderful things. Actually.
Wow! Graham, how would human remains last that long? I can understand some other artifacts, but human remains—that's amazing.
In fossilized form, yeah, they do, and these were fossilized, and they had lasted because they ran carbon dating tests on pieces of cut wood that were found amongst this artifact. The wood was perfectly preserved. Right. And the date that they got from the carbon dating, which is a standard archaeological tool, and I'm often accused of ignoring it, but a date that was given by carbon dating was 9,500 years ago, 7,500 BC. That's about 4,000 years older than any city known to archaeologists anywhere in the world. And it suddenly led to a huge jump in the seriousness with which these ruins on the bottom of the Gulf of Cambay were taken, because no longer could it be said that they were simply an artifact of the imaging process or some kind of scientific hallucination. Once you pull 2,000 artifacts out of them, it obviously and logically enormously increases the possibility that they're man-made. And in fact, nobody in India is in serious doubt about that now. The clearest signature of what kind of people they were comes from the character of the buildings that they've left behind, which are now on the seabed. And these are very extensive structures with huge walls and massive foundations. There's another technique called sub-bottom profiling, which kind of takes an X-ray of the sea bottom and looks at what's underneath the bottom. And what sub-bottom profiling has shown on these structures in the Gulf of Cambay is that they have massive foundations, very, very strong, and probably made of very large blocks of stone. The character of the walls that are left above water is just huge. It's on an enormous scale and very geometrical with lots of right angles in it, and you can see clear shapes of large, square, and rectangular constructions. Now, for a society to put all of this together 9,000 or more years ago, you have to understand that at that period of the past, what archaeology says we're dealing with is just small villages and settlements. Yes. The very largest that you might find, well-known places like Jericho and Kapılhayak in Turkey, which are both known early settlements, are about 150 times smaller than what we find on the bottom of the Gulf of Cambay. So it's completely it's completely out of context and perspective in the period to which it's applied. Now, even beyond that, you have to, when you look at a big city, you have to ask yourself, how did those people support themselves? How did they eat? How did they sustain themselves?
Exactly.
And it's difficult to imagine a city or cities of these sizes being established without a solid agricultural base to feed them. However, 9,000 years ago, agriculture is supposed to have been only just beginning, not have got to the stage where it could support large cities. Far from that, thousands of years away from that. So there we have another mystery, and I think it's possible that the answers to all of these mysteries are on the 10 million square miles of land that was submerged by rising sea levels around the world at the end of the Ice Age. That's an area bigger than South America and North America as far as the Canadian border added together.
Right. You've been doing an Indiana Jones thing all over the world, it seems like. Something in the Bay of Bengal. What are you doing there?
This is southeast India. We were talking a few moments ago about big cities that have been discovered underwater in northwest India.
That's right, yes.
But right far away in the southeast of India, often a state of India called Tamil Nadu, inhabited by Tamil-speaking people, there has been another discovery. And in fact, this discovery was made by Indian archaeologists some years ago, back in 1993. Mm-hmm. They were doing a survey of ruins which were very close to shore in that area. In fact, they were so close to shore that some of them were completely exposed at low tide. And these ruins were dated accurately to not very old, between 300 BC and 300 AD. Mm-hmm. But while they were doing that survey, they also decided to look in deeper water. And they went out, again using initially side-scan sonar, but in this case supported by diving as well, including by myself. They went out with side-scan sonar, and they found at 5 kilometers from the shore, say 3 miles out from shore, right, at a depth of 70 feet, a very large structure which shouldn't be there. They couldn't figure out what it was. It was shaped like a horseshoe, and it was shown on the side-scan sonar to be surrounded by other structures. In 93, they put down some marine archaeologists to dive on it, and they found that it was a man-made structure with courses of blocks clearly visible in the side of it under the marine growth. But they didn't know what to do with it because it was so far from shore. It couldn't be connected to the ruins that were inshore and much younger. I like to think, from studying ancient texts, and in this case particularly relevant are the ancient texts of India, that we may be looking at a society which in some ways was very different from ours. If they developed technology, it would have been of a different sort. The primary interest of that society was not particularly technological or material. Mm-hmm. You can even see this in India today, that millions of people in India spend their entire lives just wandering as pilgrims from place to place, having completely renounced the world because they believe that attachment to the world slows down the progress of the soul. So we can't assume that an earlier society, an earlier civilization was as interested in technology as we are. For archaeologists who are invested in the present view of the past, which is a straight line development from rather simple and primitive beginnings through a nice series of gradual evolutionary steps until we get cities and eventually end up with what we have today. That such an idea simply cannot accommodate cities that are 9,000 years old at the bottom of the Gulf of Cambay. And in fact, I have to stress that the date on those cities, which is retrieved from carbon-dated artifacts, is supported by sea level studies, because there's a whole science which studies the extent to which sea level rose at the end of the last ice age. Mm-hmm. And this science puts the submergence of the Gulf of Cambay round about 7,700 years ago. So it means that the cities there couldn't have been built before that date, and so the carbon date of about 1,500 years older than that makes sense. What's intriguing about this structure in southeast India is the depth of submergence on that coast.
it could have been a civilization that was based on certain beliefs,
Yes.
based on certain facts that we no longer understand. Correct?
I think that's exactly the way to look at it. That it raises two questions: not only the possibility that great civilizations can be destroyed and lost for thousands of years, almost without trace, but also that the pattern in which a civilization evolves is not necessarily fixed in the model that we have today. Perhaps there are other ways for this to happen. Perhaps our kind of global dominant society today is only one of many routes that human beings could take, and perhaps not even necessarily the best.
Now, you saw this with your own eyes. Is there any question at all about what you saw?
No. As far as I'm concerned, I've seen a lot more evidence on this than has so far been made public. And by the way, the story of the Indian underwater cities is hardly known about at all in the U.S.
I wanted to say something about earthquakes in two of the areas that Graham described in India.
Yeah.
In October, there was a 0.6 earthquake in the ocean, 50 kilometers from Pondicherry.
Yeah, that's in the east, on the east coast of India. Yeah.
Yeah, southeast.
Yeah.
And I happened to be around 150 kilometers from there at the time, so I can tell you for sure there was an earthquake.
Yep.
And the Indian newspaper said that because of this Pondicherry quake, the scientists would have to redraw the earthquake zone map of India because previously they had not considered this to be a high-risk area.
Yeah, that's very interesting. An earthquake. Now, you say this was 200 kilometers offshore?
Oh no, the 50 kilometers from Pondicherry towards the ocean. In other words, in the ocean, 50 kilometers from Pondicherry.
I get you. Yeah, it is unusual. Earthquakes in that area are unusual. It's a stable part of the continent. Up in northern India, a different matter, of course. In northwest India, very bad earthquakes as a result of mountain building processes there. But in southeast India, no, it's supposed to be stable. So that is interesting.
Yes, the one in the north, of course, was famous, being devastating. The one in Gujarat.
That's right. That was one of the worst earthquakes that has occurred for a very long time, and it had catastrophic effects in Gujarat, which can still be seen to this day because I was out there relatively recently. But that's an area where you expect earthquakes.
Yeah.
And where they're regular. But in southeast India, they're not.
Yeah, well, since with this new information, I guess they can be expected now there also, it would seem that two of these civilizations that are underwater may actually be in earthquake zones. So I thought that might be interesting.
It's a very interesting point, and one worth developing, because the scientists who are studying the end of the Ice Age have found a very curious link between periods of rapid meltdown of the ice and periods of increased earthquake and volcanic activity around the world.
And then I found something completely different. An interview where Graham faces the modern world. Piers Morgan asks the questions everyone's too afraid to ask. And what happens next shows why these ideas were never meant to go mainstream.
The whole point of science and history and all these things is to challenge perceived wisdom. Otherwise, how do we evolve and learn more?
And hopefully to do so in an intelligent and thoroughly worked out way.
But yours is a logical mind, but it's applied to a lack of facts. Would that be fair?
Yes, it's just as archaeologists are logical people, and their work is applied to lack of facts as well. I mean, they've only excavated, 5% or less of the world's surface. There's huge areas that are completely unknown. The Sahara Desert is almost completely unexcavated. The Amazon rainforest, where in our show we've been finding evidence of highly advanced cultures which were previously completely unsuspected in the Amazon rainforest. Indeed, populations of millions, cities in the Amazon rainforest. My feeling is that the further we go into this, we are likely to find more and more evidence which disturbs the existing picture. And I've been trying for the last 30 years to put forward pieces of the puzzle that I do not feel are explained by mainstream archaeology and that are worthy of consideration.
So when people
as to geologists, by the way.
Right, so when people call you a crank, what do you say to them?
They're welcome to call me whatever they want.
But what do you feel about that?
Of course, it's not nice to be called a crank. Why would one welcome that? Especially when I take my work seriously, when it's my passion, when it's everything that I do.
What do you really want to achieve? What is the goal?
Most of all, what I would like to achieve is for archaeologists to engage with my work without smearing me, without calling me a racist and a white supremacist and a misogynist and an anti-Semite. All of these words were applied to me in the Society for American Archaeology open letter to Netflix, trying to persuade Netflix to reclassify my work as science fiction. They used all of these.
Why have they
words.
called you these things?
There's no basis in the series for that at all. And the only basis there is that I reported indigenous myths from the Americas, which talked about bearded, white-skinned people coming to America. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent of Mexico, is a classic example, which talked about people with white skin coming to the Americas in the distant past and bringing knowledge and civilization with them. Those are indigenous myths. Woke archaeologists have tried to reinterpret them recently and say, oh, they were all made up by the Spanish. To me, that is a racist assertion, that the people of the country were themselves so stupid that ideas introduced by the Spanish would be fully accepted by them as fact within 30 or 40 years.
How do you think we all got here?
We all got on planet Earth?
Yeah. How do you think it all started?
I think it all started with very small bacteria, and the laws of evolution applied.
And what was there before the bacteria?
Well, a primeval soup, according to science.
What's that?
Who knows? But here's the if you want to go that route, the Earth supposedly was formed about 4.5 billion years ago, 4,500 million years ago. It supposedly was not cool enough to support life until about 4 billion years ago. But then by 3.9 billion years ago, the planet is seething with bacterial life. And the mainstream argument is that bacterial life just evolved by accidental bumping together of molecules.
Do you believe that?
I don't. I go with Francis Crick on that, surprisingly, because as you know, Francis Crick won the Nobel Prize for the double helix structure.
I'm very aware of his work.
And he did not, in a less-known book by Francis Crick called Life Itself that was published in 1981, he looked into the plausibility of what he called directed panspermia. He felt that it was impossible for life to have evolved accidentally on Earth, for the DNA-RNA system to have just appeared by accident. He thinks it was sent to planet Earth. May have been, he speculated, this is not me, this is Francis Crick. He speculated that there must have been some gigantic civilization in some far-off part of the universe.
And a bit of it came to Earth.
No, they discovered that they were going, this is Crick, they discovered that they were going to be wiped out in a supernova explosion, that's the suggestion. They looked for ways to get themselves off the planet. Distances are too great. They settled on cryogenic freezing of bacteria. They encoded DNA into those bacteria and they fired them off into the universe in all directions. And one of those spaceships landed on the early Earth 3.9 billion years ago. And I must repeat, this is not Graham Hancock. This is Francis Crick, won the Nobel Prize.
Yes.
And this is his book, Life Itself, published in 1981. Directed panspermia.
I mean, look, I used to love Star Trek when I was a kid.
He made the point that the universe is more than 13 billion years old.
Yeah.
And there's time for life to have evolved.
No, I get all that.
Once.
But my question for all people like Richard Dawkins, I've interviewed everyone on this subject, you can imagine, is, well, what was there before nothing? And because the human brain can't comprehend that and can't answer that question, I'm a religious person. I believe in God. I was raised a Catholic. And the reason that I have stayed that way is because to me it makes perfect sense. It's logical that there must be a supernatural entity out there which is more sophisticated than the human brain, because we cannot answer that simple question. What was there before nothing?
We certainly can't.
Right?
What was there before the Big Bang? Nobody
So
can
it's because they can't answer
It is
that
a strong
question.
argument for a creator of some sort. Whether that entity is supernatural or whether supernatural is simply natural that we haven't yet understood is another question.
Are you religious or
not? I was brought up as a Christian. I abandoned Christianity in my early 20s. I have been through a series of changes. I feel that life does have purpose, that it does have meaning. I don't think we're here by accident. I don't believe that death is the end. I think we are incarnated in physical bodies, but I think consciousness and the body are separate issues. I think life goes on. So in that sense, I am a spiritual person rather than necessarily a religious person. I don't follow a particular religious doctrine.
But you do think there's something else at the end?
I do, particularly the notion that the death is not the end, that it's perhaps the beginning of the next great adventure.
Right. Do you believe in dragons? And you were on with Joe Rogan. 27 million people watching, but Joe Rogan recently said he's a dragon believer. He's probably a bit tongue-in-cheek. I kind of thought with dragons, how do we know, right? We know dinosaurs flew around. How do we know none of them breathe fire?
Actually, we don't.
Right, we don't.
We don't.
I'm using the old Graham Hancock
it would be interesting,
technique here. It
would be interesting, though, to find out how that idea passed down to anatomically modern humans and got encoded in language, since the dinosaurs were more than 66 million
But
years
is it
ago.
more likely or not that dragons existed, do you think?
I would say it's less likely that they existed, but creatures like dragons certainly did exist. Look at the pterosaurs.
Why has no one from Hollywood just come and thought, you know what, Graham, whether what you're saying is right or not, your mind is so fantastical, your attention to detail is so amazing. Why have they not come to you and said, here's a 7-movie deal? Go and do just something completely nuts based on all your theories, thoughts, findings, whatever?
I don't know. Ask them.
Are you available?
I would welcome it. I am being talked to by Hollywood about a couple of different things at the moment. Yeah, but talking with Hollywood about things and actually getting things done are very different.
Well, Keanu Reeves is a friend of yours, right?
Yes, I like.
And he believes completely in what you're doing.
I can't speak for Keanu. I know that he's deeply curious about the past. He and I.
I mean, in a way, you've made me more curious about this kind of stuff because I like the honesty of saying I don't actually know. Right? If you were saying this with complete self-righteous certainty, that's one thing. If all you're doing is digging, my journalist hat says to me, you know what? Yes. Why isn't that the point of journalism? Isn't it the point of people to actually just challenge every preconceived notion and keep chipping away and make the experts think about these things?
I've never fully understood why this particular 30-year project of mine has attracted so much intense hostility from certain sectors of archaeology. Because I'm not saying I've proved anything. I don't claim to have proved anything. I'm saying there are huge numbers of unanswered questions.
You're suggesting things that we ought to find answers to.
For me, it's a black hole in the past, and it's during the Ice Age, and it's an episode that comes to an end around 12,500 years ago.
You talk about having had an encounter with an alien in the Amazon. You had a typical alien encounter. I'm not quite sure what that would be. Tell me about your...
Well, then we have to get into this issue of my spirituality, such as it is. In 2005, I published a book called Supernatural, Meetings with the Ancient Teachers of Mankind. It's recently been republished in America as Visionary, the definitive edition of Supernatural. In that book, I was intrigued by the astonishing similarities between art that's being painted in the Amazon rainforest by shamans today and art that's being painted was painted, for example, in Chauvet Cave or in Lascaux Cave in France. And the best explanation from this comes from a professor of anthropology at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa, David Lewis Williams. He suggested that all of this art is shamanistic art. And the essence of shamanism is an altered state of consciousness, not everyday problem-solving state, but a deeply altered state of consciousness. And he managed to demonstrate, and further research has borne this out thoroughly, that the visionary experiences in a deeply altered state of consciousness, whether it's brought on by magic mushrooms or LSD, or most particularly dimethyltryptamine, DMT, which is an ingredient of ayahuasca, the imagery that results, whether the person is in America or Britain or the Amazon, the imagery is very, very, very similar. It starts off with geometric patterns, then you start seeing entities.
So do you think you actually had an alien encounter?
No, let me finish this. Right now, at Imperial College, a major study is going on with human volunteers, an extended administration of dimethyltryptamine, the most powerful psychedelic known to man. And these volunteers are all recording astonishingly similar experiences of encounters with entities. They don't know what those entities are. But here's the interesting thing. These entities have much in common with spirits, as described by shamans. They have much in common with fairies and elves, as described in the Middle Ages. And today they're construed as aliens. I think that what we're doing is a single phenomenon is being construed through different cultural lenses according to the interest of the culture.
But what was your alien encounter?
So I'm sitting on a bench in the middle of the Amazon jungle outside a shaman's hut, and I've just drunk a really hefty dose of ayahuasca about 2 hours before. I've had more than 70 sessions with it.
What is ayahuasca? For those who don't know.
Ayahuasca is a brew of the Amazon. It consists of two different plants. One of them is the ayahuasca vine, and the other is a bush that they call chacruna. Psychotria viridis is the name of the Amazon. The leaves of the bush contain DMT. the vine contains a substance called harmine and harmaline. DMT is not orally active. In order to experience DMT, people in the West vape it or smoke it. But if you eat it, it is destroyed by an enzyme in the gut called monoamine oxidase. Astonishingly, in the Amazon, they figured out a plant that includes a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. So when you mix the leaves with the DMT, with the bark of the vine of the ayahuasca vine, you have orally accessible DMT, and that puts people into a roughly
So you're having a psychedelic
4-hour journey. I was having an intense 4-hour journey in which I encountered, as many of the volunteers at Imperial College do, quite a number of entities. And amongst those entities was more than one, 2 or 3, which had what we would regard as the classic ET face. ETs are not my thing.
An ET came to you?
But I had an experience of an encounter with an intelligent entity, and that entity is looking down at me, and I'm suddenly terrified. And I do what I shouldn't have done. Instead of embracing that experience, I said, no, I thought I was going to be taken. I said no, and I opened my eyes wide, and I stopped that experience. And that particular encounter, that experience has never come back. But entities looking exactly...
You were terrified of being snatched by an ET?
Yes, that's what I felt at the time.
Just to be clear, you're not on ayahuasca now, right?
Well, if I was, I'd be vomiting. And you know, ayahuasca is a powerful purgative.
Yeah.
And nobody drinks ayahuasca for fun.
Right.
It's going to
How many times have you drunk it?
About 70 since 2003. Why? Because for me, it's a very important therapy. It's helped me to realize things about myself that I was shutting off from myself. It's shown me like anger, like the tendency to get furiously angry very rapidly and to say things that I subsequently am hugely going to regret. Ayahuasca has shown me that and has given me the opportunity to fix that problem. You can't fix a lifetime of bad habits in a single night, but I've kept on working on this, and I think.
What do your family make of you and your
my family
obsession?
My family joined me in my obsession. Most of the members of my family, including my adult children, have drunk ayahuasca.
Really?
As well. Yeah. And
sounds like you have a lot of fun in your family.
I feel very blessed to have the family that I have, and I feel very blessed to have lived the life that I've lived.
We've got to wrap it up, unfortunately. I'd love to do a longer one with you another time, but what is the one question you would most like to have answered?
What exactly happened between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago? The world went through a horrific climate catastrophe. 12,800 years ago, for the 1,000+ years before that, the world had been warming up, getting out of the Ice Age. It was becoming a very friendly place. And then suddenly, bang, it changed completely. Global temperatures plunged to the peak of temperatures at the last Ice Age. All the great megafauna of the Ice Age were wiped out in that 1,200-year period. There may have been a few minor survivals, but basically this is the period of the extinction of the megafauna. It's the period where at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, 11,600 years ago, exactly the end of that climate episode, we have this extraordinary megalithic site built at Göbekli Tepe, consisting of 20-ton megalithic pillars, arranged in a series of circles. The pillars are T-shaped. The top of the T seems to form the head, and they have arms and fingers carved into their side. Several of them have very precise astronomical alignments. It's a very, very sophisticated site, and it's roughly 7,000 years older than Stonehenge, but it dwarfs Stonehenge in its scale. This raises huge questions. What is the background to all that? Where does it come from? It's mysteries like that intrigue me, and I'd like to know what happened in that 1,200 years when I do not claim to prove, I think that a civilization that had gone a bit further than other cultures at that time.
And just when I thought I'd heard everything, I found another hidden recording. Graham Hancock talking about something almost no one mentions anymore. The lost Benben stones, the sacred pyramids, once said to hold the power of the gods.
It is said that at one time, the surfaces of the Great Pyramid were covered with smooth, polished stone with a mirror-like finish. Have you discovered the quarry, which was the source of the stone, and what happened to the stones? Also, what is the relationship between the capstone mentioned in the Bible and the capstone of the Great Pyramid?
Well, to answer the first question first, yes, all three of the Great Pyramids, it is known for sure, were once completely encased in polished white limestone. And from the very few surviving casing blocks, we are able to say a number of things about this limestone casing. Firstly, it was an extraordinary technological feat. There were 22 acres of limestone facing stones on the sides of the Great Pyramid. Secondly, these stones had an average weight of 16 tons each. Thirdly, they were lined up to each other with such precision that in the few remaining casing stones it is impossible to slip even a sheet of paper, of thin paper, into the joints. The joints are so closely aligned, and the great Egyptologist William Flinders Petrie at the turn of the century likened the precision of the casing blocks to modern opticians' work, to quote him, on a scale of acres. They were a remarkable technological feat. Now, we know that they covered the entire pyramids from earlier travelers' tales. Many of the Arab commentators wrote about how the pyramids shone brilliantly in the sun with this polished white casing. What we're now seeing is the substructure that lies underneath the casing. But there was an enormous earthquake hit the city of Cairo in 1301, and it is this earthquake that shook loose the majority of the facing stones. And unfortunately, those facing stones were then, large part of the remainder, were then quarried off the pyramids by the local population and used in the construction of large parts of Cairo. As to the source of the stone, it's the Mokattam Hills, about 20 miles away to the east of Giza, across the River Nile.
So it is known. And the capstone?
The missing capstone of the Great Pyramid is an extremely interesting matter. We cannot be certain that it was ever in place. It is possible that the Great Pyramid never did have a capstone. I personally think it probably did have a capstone, but since it has been missing since recorded history began, we cannot be absolutely certain of this. I've climbed the Great Pyramid 3 times, and the top of the Great Pyramid today forms a perfect square, roughly 20 feet along each side. With half an additional course of masonry. What's happened is that masonry has been knocked off the top and rolled down over the centuries. There is enormous significance in Egyptian tradition attached to the pyramidion, the capstone, the top of a pyramid. It was called, as I said earlier, the benben. It was the ultimate symbol of the immortality of the soul. And my colleague Robert Boval has argued in his earlier book, The Orion Mystery, that one possibility for what may be hidden inside one of the concealed chambers in the Great Pyramid is indeed this missing capstone, that it was taken off by the high priest at a certain point and placed inside the pyramid.
Boy, you'd have to wonder what would happen if they put it back.
And then I found something that honestly gave me chills. A rare clip where Graham Hancock reveals what he calls the original map of the world, the one they never wanted us to see.
When archaeologists talk about seafaring humans, what do they date that to?
The great seafaring adventure that is accepted by archaeology is called the Polynesian expansion. And it's a remarkable story. And that occurs roughly 3,000 to 3,500 years ago. And those Polynesians were amazing ocean navigators. They could cross distances of thousands of kilometers with pinpoint accuracy. I mean, it's not an accident that the Polynesians found Easter Island. Finding Easter Island is a really challenging project. Easter Island is 2,000 miles from the coast of South America. It's 2,000 miles from the nearest other island, which is Tahiti. It's just a little speck in the middle of the ocean, but the Polynesians found it and settled there and appear to have brought a reproductively viable population there and appear to have made voyages back and forth. But that was 3,000 to 3,500 years ago. That was not 12,800 years ago. And this is where archaeology's adamant position that ocean voyaging was begun by the Polynesians and that there was no major ocean voyages before that, I think needs to be strongly questioned, and it needs to be strongly questioned in the light of this DNA evidence from the Amazon rather than rejecting the evidence. An attempt should be made to consider what that might mean.
Well, it's interesting because we know that the Egyptians had boats.
Yeah.
And so, if there were boats 4,500 years ago, why do we think that they didn't try them out in the ocean? That doesn't make any sense, especially if they existed 1,000 years prior, which is also possible.
Archaeologists wouldn't argue that the Egyptians had boats, but that is still within the framework of accepted history. It's the notion of a global navigating culture in the Ice Age that archaeologists can't swallow. It's a subject that I've kept on coming up against over a number of years. I think the best evidence for it is ancient maps, which show the world as it looked during the last ice age. We're talking about maps that were drawn roughly between the 1300s and the 1700s. In other words, in relatively recent history. However, these maps were largely based on much older source maps, which they copied. And we can say that for sure, because one of the famous maps is the Piri Reis map, which was created by a Turkish admiral called Piri Reis in the year 1513. Actually, only a corner of his map has survived. It was originally a world map. We now just have a bit that shows the east coast of South America and North America and the west coast of Africa. Piri Reis writes in that map that it is in his own handwriting that he based it on more than 100 older source maps, some of which had come from the Library of Alexandria. In other words, that maps had been, when the Library of Alexandria had been destroyed in the 4th century AD or whenever it was, some of its contents had been rescued and brought to Constantinople, which became the Turkish capital, and Piri Reis had access to those maps, and he incorporated information from those maps on his maps, as well as incorporating more recent navigational information. And this is one of a whole category of maps which are extremely hard to explain. All of them based on older source maps, now lost, all of them incorporating extremely precise relative longitudes and latitudes. Latitude is not that difficult a technological feat, but longitude is a difficult technological feat. Longitude involves a chronometer. It involves knowing the time at the place you began your voyage and the local noon as well, and calculating the difference between them. You need a chronometer that will keep accurate time at sea with the motions of a ship. And it's just a plain fact that our civilization did not invent such a chronometer until the late 18th century. Before that, we didn't know what longitude we were at, and ships were constantly sailing unexpectedly into coastlines that they thought were hundreds of miles further away. So the discovery of the technique to do longitude was a major civilizational advance. Its presence in maps based on much older source maps that actually show the world as it looks during the last ice age suggests that somebody during the last ice age was mapping the world and had mastered the technique of calculating longitude. Classic example of these maps, and I make a point of this, is what's called the Pinkerton World Map, which was drawn in the year 1818, and it was based on the latest navigational information at that time. I reproduced that map in the book. What's missing from the map, entirely missing, is Antarctica. There's just a hole at the bottom of the world. There's nothing there. The reason that Antarctica is not there is that our civilization hadn't discovered Antarctica in 1818. Oh. So they couldn't authentically put it on a map in 1818. Actually, we discovered it in 1819, and that's when it starts appearing on modern maps. The problem is that Antarctica appears repeatedly on these much older maps, and it appears in the right place and a bit bigger than it is today, but very much as it looked during the last ice age. So what all of this suggests to me is that the world was mapped and explored by a global seafaring culture with a level of technology that was at least equivalent to ours at the end of the 18th century during the ice age.
Wasn't there also a map of Greenland that showed it underneath the ice?
Yes, there are. And another intriguing thing, I mentioned the Piri Reis map just now. Shown on the Piri Reis map, lying off the east coast of North America, is a large island with a row of megaliths, like a road of megaliths, running up the middle of it. That island is in the exact place of the Grand Bahama Banks. So this island is sitting there off the southeast coast of North America.
Look at the way they used to draw things back then, too.
And what you see running down the middle of it is this road-like feature of megaliths. I'll point them out again.
I see, right there, yeah.
These here. Now the thing is, there was a long period of my life when I did a lot of scuba diving, and I was looking at underwater structures. And one of the sites I dived on was the Bimini Road, which is in the Grand Bahama Banks. And the Bimini Road is exactly where that island is. And here's the issue. I don't care whether the Bimini Road is natural or man-made. For me, the mystery is that it is shown above water on that map. And the last time it was above water was thousands and thousands of years ago. So for me, this is all evidence that we shouldn't dismiss the possibility that our ancestors had achieved a level of technology where they could explore and map the world's oceans. We shouldn't dismiss that. And the whole effort of archaeology has been to dismiss the significance of the Bimini Road.
Why would they dismiss that?
Well, they say
it's just
they say it's totally natural. I can tell you, I absolutely do not think it's natural. I think it's a man-made structure. But the argument is that it's a kind of beach rock that forms in these blocky formations.
Does it? Is that
yes, beach rock does form in blocky formations. But here I believe that the beach rock has been used as a construction material. But I repeat, the key issue is not whether the Bimini Road is man-made or not. The key issue is that it features on a map above water. And that is a dating project. That tells us that somebody was mapping that bit of the world when it was above water. And
Jamie,
that
go back to that
takes us back a long way into the past.
After hearing all these hidden stories, one question kept echoing in my mind. If so many truths have been buried, what else did ancient civilizations leave behind, waiting to be uncovered?
Well, all these civilizations all did it on their own.
Yeah.
That they, this idea that there was this older advanced civilization that taught everybody how to do stuff is absolutely ridiculous. They did it all on their own.
That's what my critics say.
Yeah, and so it's
they think that I'm trying to steal the achievements of indigenous societies and hand them over to some sort of civilization like ours.
Right.
No, that's not what I'm doing. That's a misrepresentation of my position. And anybody who actually reads my books, or watches the series will see that is not what I'm saying, and that's not what I'm doing. I think we're looking at a civilization that emerged out of shamanism and took a particular route, and of course it was an indigenous civilization in its own time, in its own place. But what they don't like is the notion that certain knowledge and information accumulated by that culture was passed down all around the world, so that you find the same essential ideas in Mesopotamia, in ancient Egypt, in the Amazon rainforest, in Mexico, in Guatemala, amongst the Mayan culture, for example. The same essential ideas are being repeated. The same story of a great flood, which brought a former age of the world to an end. The same story of survivors of that flood who went around the world trying to reincarnate or give rebirth to what they had created and shared their knowledge with other peoples around the world. This is truly a pan-American myth. It's found right across the Americas, and archaeologists are now trying to claim that myth was entirely made up by Spaniards. But it's complete rubbish. It long predated the Spaniards, and it's found in many, many countries in Central America, South America, and in North America. And it's an indigenous tradition that has been passed down through the ages, that there was a cataclysm.
It's not just coincidence, Graham, right?
I don't believe it's coincidence. I believe that it's worth considering the possibility of a remote common ancestor, which passed down key information that was inherited by later cultures and then used in various ways. An example that's really worth giving is the Great Pyramid itself, the Great Pyramid of Giza.
Which we don't know how old it is.
I'm willing to accept that the Great Pyramid, in the form that we see it now, was largely completed by the ancient Egyptians. But remember that in dynastic times, in other words, between 5,000 and 4,000 years ago, roughly 4,500 years ago. But remember that the ancient Egyptians tell us in many of their texts that everything they knew was a legacy. It was all an inheritance of the gods, and I don't construe the gods as aliens. It was a legacy of the gods, and they speak of a time called Zep Tepi, the first time, which followed a cataclysmic episode when the gods brought this knowledge to Egypt and passed it down. Now, in the case of the Great Pyramid and the whole Giza Plateau, I think if we were to, this is my view, and it's based on a great deal of research which is entirely dismissed by archaeologists. Whenever they dismiss my work, they don't really get to grips with the work itself. It's just a narrative they don't want to hear.
Right.
So they dismiss it. But if I were to if I were to try to envisage the Giza Plateau 12,500 years ago, I think what we'd see is an enormous rock-hewn statue of a lion facing due east, perfectly due east, where the sun rises on the spring equinox. Sun rises perfectly due east in the northern hemisphere on the 21st of March. If you go to the summer solstice, it's rising far to the north of east. You go to the winter solstice, it's rising far to the south of east. But on the spring equinox, it's perfectly due east. So there's this huge lion statue with a massive leonine head and a lion's mane, and it's been created by carving it out of the bedrock and creating a trench around it. And it faces the rising sun at dawn on the spring equinox, as it still does today. But 12,500 years ago, the rising sun at dawn on the spring equinox was housed by the constellation of Leo, the constellation that we recognize and many cultures have recognized as a lion. So as above, so below, this lion monument gazing at its celestial counterpart rising behind the sun at dawn on the spring equinox. I believe that the megalithic temples that we see in front of the Great Sphinx, the so-called Sphinx Temple and the Vali Temple, these are colossal megalithic works, were also there at that time, around 12,500 years ago. And what happened was that in later times, the ancient Egyptians, who were the inheritors of the culture that originally established the Giza Plateau, that the ancient Egyptians found it necessary to restore and modify some very ancient monuments. So that's why on the Vali Temple, which is in front of, but a little to the south of the Great Sphinx, that's why on the Vali Temple, we see that it's created in two stages. The first stage is the core limestone blocks, and they are massive, hundreds of tons in some cases, certainly up to 200 tons in the case of some of these megalithic temples on the Giza Plateau. But the limestone is heavily eroded. And then in dynastic times, they took the trouble to bring granite to the Giza Plateau, and then to cut that granite so that it fitted the existing erosion patterns on the much older limestone blocks, and fit it onto them there. That shows two things. It shows, first of all, that they respected the limestone blocks, and secondly, it shows that the granite facing is younger than the limestone blocks itself. And there is nothing, not a single inscription in those temples which says this was built by Pharaoh such and such in such and such a time.
Yeah.
I think that where the three great pyramids stand, the pyramids that are now attributed to Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, I think what stood there at that time were low platforms, megalithic platforms. In the case of the Great Pyramid, they didn't need to do much because the Great Pyramid itself is built around a natural hillock. And deep underneath it, 100 feet vertically beneath the base of the Great Pyramid is a chamber, subterranean chamber, hewn out of solid bedrock. I think that was the original sacred site on the Giza Plateau. And the Great Pyramid, originally a platform, was completed in the time of the ancient Egyptians using knowledge that was passed down from that much more ancient time. Now, why it operated in two phases like this, you know, in ancient cultures that took the heavens seriously and that understood the notion of world ages, 12,500 years ago was a very dramatic time on our planet. This was the 12,800 years ago was the onset of the Younger Dryas, which is a catastrophic climate episode, which is where the Earth has been emerging quite slowly and almost pleasantly from the Ice Age, and then suddenly goes back into a dramatic deep freeze. And weirdly, at the same time, there's an almost instant sea level rise recorded, for example, in Bahamian corals, which can only exist at a certain depth beneath the surface of the sea. And that's odd, because this is a time when the world's climate has suddenly gone very cold. It was warming up, and then it goes as cold as it was at the peak of the last Ice Age. You wouldn't expect to see sea level rise happening then. But the work of Cesare Emiliani has proved that sea level rise did occur then. Then you have about 1,200 years of true horror on this planet. That's the time that all the great megafauna of the Ice Age go extinct. We're all familiar with the saber-toothed tigers, the woolly rhinos, the mammoths, the mastodons, the giant sloths. They were everywhere then, but they all went extinct during the Younger Dryas. So clearly, this was a very bad time if it could wipe out just huge numbers of animal species that were very successful species prior to that. There's evidence of a collapse in human populations at that time. It was a very bad time. And it may have been, I believe that's the time where we lost track of an episode in our story, where we lost track of an earlier civilization, that not our civilization, not like us. We should never look for ourselves in the past, but a civilization that was capable of exploring and navigating the earth, that understood the dimensions of the earth, and that understood how the earth looked and was capable of creating accurate maps with accurate longitudes. Incorporated into the Great Pyramid are the dimensions of our planet. And again, yes, Egyptologists know that this is the case, but they regard it as a coincidence. It just happened by accident.
Yeah.
But it's a point that I like to bring home. And this is that if you take the height of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by 43,200, you get the polar radius of the Earth. And if you take the base perimeter of the Great Pyramid, measure that, and multiply it by the same number, 43,200, you get the equatorial circumference of the Earth. So the key dimensions of our planet are encoded on a scale of 1 to 43,200 in the Great Pyramid. And to tell us that it's speaking to the Earth, it's also almost perfectly aligned to true north, within 3/60ths of a single degree. Yeah. I mean, that is a tiny, tiny error on a monument that weighs 6 million tons and has a footprint of 13 acres, you know. So it's speaking to the Earth, and it encodes the dimensions of the Earth. But archaeologists say, what's so special about 43,200? It's just random. You know? But no, I'm sorry, it's not random. It's 600 times 72. It's one of those numbers generated by the precession of the equinoxes. 43,200 is a number that occurs in many ancient texts and traditions, or 432,000 multiples of the same number keep on coming up again and again and again. And that is a number system that is generated by a key motion of the Earth itself. So how clever can you get? Yeah. You have a gigantic monument which nobody understands how anybody could build it in the first place. You almost perfectly align it to true north. You then encode the dimensions of the Earth in that monument, and the scale you used is a scale defined by a key motion of the Earth itself. I mean, come on. Yeah. This cannot be an accident.
It seems so obvious.
We're looking at science here. Mm-hmm. We're looking at an ancient lost science that the ancient Egyptians were the inheritors of, as they themselves loudly and frequently proclaimed. It's just that archaeologists don't want them to say that.
Yeah,
it's interesting with the king lists in ancient Egypt. There are king lists all over the temples. For example, the Temple of Seti I in Abydos, lists of kings. And actually, Egyptologists use those king lists in formulating their chronology of ancient Egypt. And they're fine with the king lists as long as they go back only to the first dynasty. But the problem is the king lists go back further. They go back more than 30,000 years into the past. And those archaeologists ignore and dismiss as myth and fantasy. And again, they claim they're the ones with respect for indigenous cultures. They're not respecting the indigenous culture of ancient Egypt with the knowledge that it manifested. They said our kings were not confined to the first dynasty onwards. There were rulers went back thousands and tens of thousands of years before that. We should listen carefully to all of these things.
I think that's what's so frustrating about it too, is that they come from this place of we're just trying to respect these ancient cultures, but they're really dismissing them.
They're very dismissive,
especially to say that all of this is just coincidence.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, you ask what are these mainstream archaeologists? They say they respect indigenous cultures. Ask them if they respect shamanistic views about the other world, about the world we enter in a deeply altered state of consciousness, about how we can encounter the spirits of deceased relatives in that world. Archaeologists will say, no, that's impossible. Yeah. Can't be. That's just their fantasy. That's just the story they tell themselves.
Stories.
Archaeologists don't know that. That's their prejudice. They are being prejudiced against indigenous cultures in that world. And they're subtly in their subconscious, they know they're doing that. Mm-hmm. And they're wearing their guilt at the way that they put down indigenous cultures, and then they want to project it onto other people.
Yes,
that's the game
exactly right.
Play.
It seems like everything you do in the digital world, whether it's apps or streaming services, involves you signing up for a subscription, and it's very easy to lose track of all of those subscriptions. And most of the time we sign up for subscriptions for, to watch a specific show or use a specific product, but after so long we just stop using it or using those services, and we forget that we're paying for those subscriptions. I know for me personally, I probably am subscribed to 10 to 20 different services, and I would say probably like half of those I don't even use anymore. And I didn't even know I was still paying for most of those until I hooked myself up with Rocket Money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills all in one place. There's over 80% of people have subscriptions they've forgotten about, and chances are you're one of them. Like that Stars app just to watch one show, or that free gaming trial you never actually used. Rocket Money will quickly and easily find your subscriptions for you, and for any you don't want to pay for anymore, just hit cancel, which is so nice. That's like one of the biggest things I don't go and cancel them on my own, is it's just a big pain in the butt. But Rocket Money will cancel it for you. It's that easy. Rocket Money also helps you manage all of your finances in one place and automatically categorizes your expenses, so you can easily track your budget in real time and also get alerted if anything looks off. They've got credit monitoring. They monitor your credit card usage. It really is a great tool to help you get organized when it comes to your personal finances. Over 3 million people, including myself, have used Rocket Money, saving the average person up to $720 a year. Stop throwing your money away, cancel unwanted subscriptions, and manage your expenses the easy way by going to rocketmoney.com/milehigher. That's rocketmoney.com/milehigher. Check it out today. rocketmoney.com/milehigher.
I mean, it's just crazy. We've talked about, alternative theories to how the pyramids were built.
Yeah.
And those out there in that field get all up in arms about it. Or if you say it wasn't the ancient Egyptian people that built it, or, didn't do it in this certain way.
Or they brought knowledge from somewhere else. Or,
right.
access something.
Yeah,
or there was technology that they accessed.
That gets everybody very upset. Yeah. The reasons that I would never seek to divorce the ancient Egyptians from the Great Pyramids are there are several reasons, actually. But first and foremost, I have no doubt that the ancient Egyptians were involved in completing the Great Pyramids, and there's 4 reasons for that. And that is the shafts, the so-called air shafts, that cut through the body of the Great Pyramid. They're very small. They're about that wide and that high. There are 2 of them in the so-called King's Chamber, one on the north wall, one on the south wall.
Mm-hmm.
And they always exited on the outside of the pyramid. And that was known back into the 19th century. 19th century explorers could actually climb the Great Pyramid and roll a cannonball into one of those shafts, and it would end up in the King's Chamber. So obviously they were connected. The shafts in the so-called Queen's Chamber, and I use the word so-called because we actually don't know what these chambers were for. No burial of any pharaoh was ever found inside the Great Pyramid. The so-called Queen's Chamber, the shafts don't exit on the outside of the Great Pyramid, and nor until 1872 were they visible within the Queen's Chamber itself. They'd been closed off with facing blocks. You couldn't see that they were there. But one researcher went around tapping on the walls. He thought, there's shafts upstairs in the King's Chamber. Maybe there are here. And he found 2 hollow points, one on the north wall, one on the south wall, broke them open, and lo and behold, there were the concealed shafts. Now, the thing about those shafts is that all 4 of them point at key stars, one of them being the lowest of the 3 stars of Orion's belt, in the position in the sky that they occupied around 2,500 BC, not 12,500 years ago, but 4,500 years ago. And that astronomical connection to the stars at that time says to me, we cannot divorce the ancient Egyptians from the Great Pyramid. But then there's a problem. The ground pattern on the 3 pyramids on the ground reflects the pattern of Orion's belt itself. Yeah. And this is, of course, no accident within the ancient Egyptian system, because the constellation of Orion was seen as the celestial image of the god Osiris, the civilization bringer, the entity who went around the world teaching civilization. That is who Osiris is, and he is seen in the sky. His image is seen in the sky as the constellation of Orion, and one of those shafts points at Orion's belt, and another one points at Sirius, and 2 of them point at the circumpolar stars. At the time when Egyptologists believed the pyramids were built, so there's definitely a connection, and I wouldn't seek to break it. But the problem is that the pattern of the 3 pyramids on the ground is the pattern of the 3 stars of the belt of Orion. And this has also changed subtly over the ages as a result of precession. So although the shafts in the Great Pyramid lock that monument to the epoch of 2500 BC, the pattern of the pyramids on the ground reflecting Orion's belt, effectively it's like you want to make a painting of Orion's belt. You paint it on an easel and then you lay it down flat in front of you. That's what you have on the Giza Plateau. They reflect the pattern of Orion's belt and its relationship to the Milky Way. The Great Pyramids and their relationship to the River Nile reflect the sky of 12,500 years ago, not 4,500 years ago. You have a very complicated situation here. Ground pattern, speaking of what the ancient Egyptians called Zep-Tepi the first time, 12,500 plus years ago. And the star shafts connecting also to the time of the ancient Egyptians themselves. So no wonder it's a difficult monument to figure out, but it speaks to both epochs. As I say, we could say that the ancient Egyptians themselves had a sufficiently advanced knowledge of precession to be able to visualize the skies of 8,000 years previously. That would be a perfectly reasonable thing to say. But then we're confronted with the problem of the Sphinx. I mentioned that lion-bodied monument. That lion monument that I believe stood there 12,500 years ago, looking at the rising sun when it was housed by the constellation of Leo. That lion monument has been subjected to thousands of years of erosion. And I want to pay tribute to the brilliant work of two individuals. The late, great John Anthony West, dear friend of mine, the first to raise the possibility that the Great Sphinx had been subjected to some kind of water weathering. And that creates a problem in itself, because 4,500 years ago, the Giza Plateau was as dry and as waterless as it is today. And then Professor Robert Schoch from Boston University. And kudos to Robert Schoch for putting his reputation as an established academic on the line and looking at the geology of that site and coming to the conclusion and publishing the conclusion that the Great Sphinx was subjected to about 1,000 years of extremely heavy rainfall. Not a flood, but precipitation, rainfall coming from above, selectively hollowing out the softer areas of rock and leaving the harder areas of rock in place. And it's that precipitation-induced weathering that you see more in the trench around the Great Sphinx now than you see on the Sphinx itself, because the Sphinx has been constantly restored. This is one of the anomalies. We know that some of the restoration blocks were put there in the time of the pharaoh who's supposed to have been responsible for the Sphinx, and not a single document tells us that he was responsible. That's just another Egyptological fantasy, actually. The erosion patterns on the Great Sphinx, and thank you to Robert Schoch for the great work he's done on this, and the risks he took in publishing that work, because every time you publish something out of line, you're taking a risk. But he took that risk and he published that work and he's documented it thoroughly, and he's confident that the Great Sphinx was subjected to about 1,000 years of heavy rainfall, and that's the only time you find that heavy rainfall on the Giza Plateau is the Younger Dryas, between roughly 12,800 and 11,600 years ago. You certainly didn't find it 4,500 years ago when the Sphinx is supposed to have been made. So we're looking at a very old monument, very heavily eroded. In the time of the ancient Egyptians, they looked at that massive leonine head, which was so damaged and so eroded, almost unrecognizable, and they recarved what was left of it into the head of a human being, wearing the Nemes headdress of an Egyptian pharaoh. But that is a recarving of a much more ancient monument. That's a restoration work that was done on it. And we don't know which pharaoh it's supposed to represent. Egyptologists like to think that it represents Khafre, but there's no compelling evidence for that whatsoever. So a lion-bodied monument, once a lion-headed monument, that now takes the form of the lion-bodied Great Sphinx with a recarved human head that's way out of proportion to the scale of the rest of the body of that 270-foot-long monument. The head is sort of tiny by comparison with the rest of the body. And the ancient Egyptians didn't get things out of proportion unless there was a very good reason to do so. And I think they were restoring a very damaged and much older leonine head.
Is there not a hidden chamber as well under the Sphinx?
Yes. While work was allowed to be done, John Anthony West and Robert Schoch were both involved in this work back in 1992. They did a seismic survey around the Sphinx, and they identified a very large geometrical chamber, about 15 feet beneath the forepaws of the Sphinx.
Wow.
20 feet beneath the forepaws. Could be a natural cavity, but the rectangular form of it suggests strongly that human beings were
dug out or something.
Yeah, that it was made. And in fact, there is a whole underworld at Giza. This is beginning to be recognized. The so-called Tomb of Osiris is an example of this. That subterranean chamber beneath the Great Pyramid is an example of this. I think there's a lot more remains to be discovered under the Giza Plateau.
Yeah.
Have they LiDAR the Giza Plateau?
Well, LiDAR in that case wouldn't help because there's no canopy covering it. Nothing you need to see
I
through.
see. Yeah,
but what is needed is seismic tomography.
Right.
And that will show you a picture of what is underneath the Giza Plateau. And whenever that's been done, it's identified chambers, passageways, corridors, and not enough is being said about this. And I don't know what's going on. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't think that Egyptologists are in a conspiracy to hide the truth. I think they're just so locked into their paradigm that they can't see what's.
They feel like they've got it figured out.
They've got it figured out.
No reason to waste resources.
Exactly. No reason to waste the resources, and they don't want to get mixed up in any way with this crowd of kind of quote unquote new age thinkers like Graham Hancock.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So have you, because there's this idea about this chamber beneath the Sphinx being potentially this hall of records.
Yes.
And that was put forth by Edgar Casey, I believe.
Which is one of the reasons that Egyptologists distance themselves from it. Although weirdly, both Mark Lehner,
which he's got a lot of knowledge around this subject, Edgar Casey, and
first of all, the fact that Edgar Casey was a healer. He used to fall into a trance-like state. And in that trance-like state, primarily what he did was offer remedies for people's ailments.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But from time to time, he would start talking about Atlantis and about a lost civilization of prehistoric antiquity. And he said that the Hall of Records of Atlantis lay beneath the paws of the Great Sphinx. Well, immediately for scientifically minded Egyptologists, this is something to get as far away from as possible.
Right.
Like this nutty guy. Yeah.
So they kind of neglect the fact that there are ancient Egyptian texts that speak precisely of that, precisely of a Hall of Records. I don't know. Edgar Casey didn't know about those texts.
Right.
He was tapping in from some other realm into this. But that's one of the reasons that Egyptologists have distanced themselves so much from the from the notion that there might be something hidden there. Oddly enough, both Mark Lehner, who is the leading American Egyptologist doing work around the Great Sphinx and on the Giza Plateau, and Zahi Hawass, who's the leading Egyptian Egyptologist doing work around the Giza Plateau, both of them were sent through college by the Edgar Casey Foundation.
Really? Wow.
Robert Baval and I published this in our 1996 book, The Message of the Sphinx. It was published in America as The Message of the Sphinx and in Britain as Keeper of Genesis. And we documented it. It's all there if anybody wants to check it out. Wow. Very rapidly afterwards, they distanced themselves completely from the Edgar Casey organization. But until quite recently, Zahi Hawass was still giving lectures at the Edgar Casey Foundation, while at the same time insisting that he had nothing to do with any of these so-called crazy ideas.
That's crazy.
You know,
wow.
it's a very curious thing. And of course, people have a right to change their mind.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's all that happened. As I say, I don't see a need for conspiracy when there's already this mindset that just rules out any other possibilities. That is the mindset of institutional archaeology, not necessarily shared by all individual archaeologists, but it is the narrative they want to tell. And what I've observed, particularly in the reaction to my Netflix series, which was seen by huge numbers of people all around the world, is that what most disturbed archaeologists about it was that here was a narrative that wasn't theirs. They weren't controlling that narrative anymore. They thought they had it taped, and they were controlling the narrative in every possible way. And suddenly, reaching out to a huge audience around the world, comes somebody they didn't like anyway,
right.
Me.
They wish it was one of them that was.
I think so.
Yeah.
Or rather, more than that, they want to remain the high priests of the past. They don't. I certainly don't want to be the high priest of the past. All I want to do is to point out that there are certain problems in mainstream study of the past which require questioning and investigation. And the questions I've asked and the conclusion I've come to is that we are a species with amnesia, that there has been a forgotten episode in the human story, and that its fingerprints are in fact all around the world, but are not seen because it doesn't fit the prevailing mainstream narrative. Now, those archaeologists were furiously angry with me because I had this huge platform, Netflix, to present my ideas on, and that's why they campaigned to have Netflix, relabel the series as science.
It's not a documentary.
Science fiction. That's what the archaeologists were
telling stories on here.
That's what archaeologists were claiming. They wanted to get back control of the narrative, but one thing that has to be remembered is that archaeology has a iron death grip on the narrative of our past. The fact that I had a Netflix series and Netflix is a big platform doesn't begin to compare with the fact that the findings, the conclusions, the narrative of mainstream archaeology informs everything that we are taught through the school and education system, right up to university, about the past. Everything we're taught about prehistory reflects the narrative of mainstream archaeology. So against that huge weight, and also most TV programs about, whether it's about ancient Egypt or other prehistoric subjects, are again informed by the institution of archaeology and reflect the narrative of archaeology. So just by dissenting from that and offering an alternative point of view, let's think about things a bit differently. Let's consider whether archaeology really does know everything it claims to know. That led to an enormous amount of fury and anger projected against me. But what it also led to was a worldwide conversation that many people who hadn't been exposed to my work were exposed to my work. And I want to make clear that, first of all, I couldn't do anything I do without the work that archaeologists have done, the groundwork that archaeologists have done. And secondly, I'm not alone. There are a number of other people working in this field. John Anthony West was one, Robert Schoch was another, Robert Boval, huge knowledge of archaeoastronomy. John Major Jenkins dealing with the Mayan calendar. Many others. John Major Jenkins has sadly passed away. Many others are working in this field. I'm just one of a number of people who are bothered by problems in the past and are trying to find answers to that problems. And some people think that the answer is extraterrestrial visitors. I don't think that's the answer, but who knows?
Well, they have a whole show too. So
they have a whole show too. That's that's not my thing. But I think what's right and proper is to be mystified by the past and the things that aren't properly explained by the mainstream model. And I think that model needs to be challenged. And this is how, ultimately, in all of science, paradigms do eventually shift. There's a great book by Thomas Kuhn called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, which shows that actually scientific disciplines get locked in a particular mindset, and it becomes dominant, and it's regarded. They forget that it's a whole load of opinion in that mindset, resting on relatively flimsy facts. That's definitely the case in archaeology. As I indicated earlier, I mean, you can't claim to know everything about the past when you haven't thoroughly archaeologized the Sahara, the Amazon rainforest, the flooded continental shelves, and most of the work that you do in other countries is in response to a dam or a road being built. You can't claim to know about that.
And just to be clear, for those that maybe haven't watched Ancient Apocalypse yet, you are really, I mean, you're a journalist, you're an investigative journalist, you don't claim to be a scientist, you don't claim to be an archaeologist, and what you're really doing is you're out there gathering puzzle pieces and trying to put a puzzle together. And that's like, and then share what you're finding in the process.
Encouraging people to think twice.
That's what I hope to do. And I've never insisted that I'm right.
Yeah, you're like, rewrite the history, but you propose that maybe we don't have it right, but you're not saying this is the right way.
Absolutely not. I'm not insisting on anything. The only thing I'm insisting on is that there are unexplained issues in our past, which are presently not explained by the system that teaches us about the past, which is archaeology. And those unexplained mysteries need to be investigated, and I've tried to investigate it. I've come to my own conclusions about them, but I don't insist that I'm right. I certainly don't insist that I'm 100% right about anything. But I've involved myself in an inquiry, which has now gone on for more than 30 years. I've put my life on the line again and again, not only me, but also my wife, Santha. This is not some trivial issue for us. This is not some some scheme to make money.
Right.
As a matter of fact, for many years I was completely broke, and all the research we did was done on borrowed money to the point where I was just ridiculously over borrowed. And we have put our lives at risk in the diving expeditions. For example, Santha nearly lost her life in one of those diving expeditions.
Really?
I in another one. When you're diving in strong currents, when something goes wrong with your air supply, it can be very, very dangerous and very, very difficult. And I think Santha and I did upwards of 1,000 dives all around the world, 200 of them in Japan on the extraordinary underwater structures that are found off the island of Yonaguni. We've been into high-risk zones. We've literally again and again put our lives on the line to try to research this story properly. I'm not some dilettante and just some shallow person who is just looking at stuff and coming rapidly to conclusions.
A keyboard warrior or something.
I'm not a keyboard warrior. I'm trying to foist those conclusions on the public. The conclusions that I've come to are a result of decades of dedicated work, which has exposed both me and Santha to great risk on numerous occasions. But we're willing to take that risk because we feel it's right to pursue this inquiry, and nobody else is really pursuing it. That's why we spent 7 years scuba diving, because not enough marine archaeology is looking at the submerged continental shelves. And if we can find structures that are indisputably man-made, for example, the great stone circle off Akajima in the Kerama Islands in Japan, there's a depth of about 100 feet beneath the surface. There's an enormous stone circle hewn out of solid rock with multiple other structures all around it. And even the most skeptical geologist who I took there could not claim that was a work of nature. That was made by human beings. And therefore, it was made about 12,000 years ago, judging from the depth of submergence, which turns out to be around the time that Göbekli Tepe was built in Turkey. That's why we did that work. We dived in Micronesia, we dived in the Mediterranean, we dived extensively in India. There's a tradition of a lost city called Dwarka up in the northwest of India. We dived there with the National Institute of Oceanography. And indeed, there are enormous structures underwater at Dwarka. And there's the tradition of Kumari Kandam in South India. It's the Indian Atlantis, if you like. There's a tradition that India was extended much further to the south than it does today, that the island of Sri Lanka was joined to mainland India, and that this extensive land was the host to a high civilization that had academies and studied the world, studied the universe, but it was destroyed in a great flood. Well, it turns out that that's exactly true. Sri Lanka was joined to South India during the Ice Age when sea level was 400 feet longer. The Maldive Islands were much bigger than the tiny archipelago that they are today. It makes complete sense, and we went diving in that area. My wife Santha speaks Tamil as her first language, and Tamil is the language of South India. So we were able, through Santha, to talk fluently with local fishermen and local divers off the coast of Southeast India. And at Mahabalipuram, they told us, there's a city underwater here. And we said, how do you know that? And they said, well, it's actually annoying. We keep catching our nets on it. We'll cast our nets to catch fish and they'll get stuck on a structure underwater, and then we have to send down a diver to free the net. Sometimes those divers die.
Oh, wow.
We'd like something done about it. And we said, would you take us to the site and show us? And eventually that's what happened. We went out there and we did multiple dives, and true enough, down to depths of 27 meters. Again, you're looking at about 11,000 years ago. They were last above water. There are enormous, indubitably man-made structures. We had some Indian archaeologists diving with us there, and they didn't dispute that. These are absolutely man-made structures. And it was those archaeologists themselves from the National Institute of Oceanography who took us to Pumpahar, where we again dived on an enormous man-made structure at about 27 meters. So if we can find this with our limited resources, taking the risks that we took, talking to local fishermen and divers, working with local archaeologists when we could, if we can find this, then what could be found if a concerted effort were made worldwide to explore the flooded continental shelves? And I think that what would be found is not only evidence of hunter-gatherer cultures, which certainly will be found there, but evidence of cultures that we would recognize as a high civilization.